August 8th, 1915, 2:47 in the morning. The foreman presses his back against the commissary wall, counting things that make no sense. Spent shell casings roll across wooden floorboards, copper catching lamplight as they spiral. The smell of cordite mixes with mesquite smoke, thick enough to choke on. 3 horses circle the corral fence, saddles empty, reins dragging through dirt. A lantern swings from a bullet-severed rope, casting shadows that lurch like living things. Blood pools dark around a dropped saddlebag, the leather flap open to reveal grocery receipts and a feed ledger. But they don't take the money. The ranch safe sits in the office, door ajar. $60,000 in payroll, untouched. Were these revolutionaries? Or did they just want everyone to think they were? Chapter 1. The Property That Won't Sell. Let me tell you about the moment everything beginning. The air conditioning dies somewhere between Kingsville and nowhere. This is South Texas in September, giving Eliana Vásquez her first warning that some places don't want to be understood easily. She pulls over on a farm road. Heat presses against the rental car windows. She's 34 years old, a heritage property consultant with 5 years of experience telling wealthy people what their blood-soaked land is worth. She has 3 flaws that will complicate every decision. She sees patterns where none might exist, never lets go of mysteries once they hook her, and takes historical injustices personally when she should stay professional. These flaws will matter. Now she's driving toward a ranch that refuses to sell, not knowing this assignment will force her to choose between her career and her conscience. That choice is coming. It's waiting for her in a commissary building where footsteps pace above rooms that have no second floor. The King Ranch. 825,000 acres, larger than Rhode Island. A private empire operating as its own nation. One small corner, the Norias division, has been on the market for 8 months. Not because of price. The consortium has money. It stalls because nobody can agree what story to tell about the land. The consortium's prospectus promises premium heritage experience. Projected rates: $2,400 to $3,200 per night. Target demographic: ultra-high net worth travelers seeking authentic frontier immersion. People who want to consume history without tasting the blood in it. Eliana's goal is simple. Determine if violent history makes the property more valuable or less. But you and I both know it won't be that simple. Her father mentioned once that his family came from South Texas, King Ranch area. When she asked for details, he changed the subject. Now, she wonders if that was a mistake. Let me show you what this place really is. The King Ranch isn't just large. It's a commercial empire operating across 4 main divisions spanning parts of 6 Texas counties. Annual revenue exceeds $300 million from cattle operations alone. The leather goods line, saddles, bags, boots bearing the running W brand, generates another $30 million annually, sold in boutiques where a wallet costs $400. The Norias division alone covers approximately 53,000 acres. At current South Texas ranch land prices of roughly $2,000 per acre for improved pasture, the raw land value approaches $106 million. The consortium's offer is $92 million, $14 million below market, reflecting what they call historical complications. Historical complications. That's one way to describe it. Eliana visits the flagship King Ranch store that morning. She watches wealthy tourists drop $2,000 on a belt. The woman at the register assures them everything is authentic. Heritage you can wear. $2,000 for a belt. More than a ranch hand in 1915 earned in a year. The Norias division appears in the distance, low buildings against empty land. The horizon is so distant it feels unreal. When Eliana steps out of the car, the silence is noticeable. Wind through mesquite sounds like voices. Metal creaks somewhere she can't see. The air smells of dust and time and something old. A security guard meets her by the gate. He hands her the commissary key without offering to walk her there, then hurries back to his truck. The commissary door opens with a sound like breath. Inside, old paper and dust, and a century of weight pressing down on everything. Boxes stacked on metal shelves. Maps, photographs, the accumulated evidence of violence that happened here in 1915, violence that some people want to forget, and other people can't afford to forget, and still other people are trying to sell to millionaires as authentic frontier experience. Eliana sets up her laptop on a scarred wooden desk. The consortium wants comparable sales data, market analysis, valuation models, professional work, clean numbers that make a messy history manageable. She pulls up her research. Reynolds Ranch in Cotulla sold last year for $1,850 per acre. Kincaid property near Laredo went for $2,100, but that included water rights. Her laptop hums. Outside, light begins to fade. She finds it as shadows stretch across the floor. Employment record: Vásquez, Thomas, foreman, Norias Division, 1914 through 1916. Survived the raid. Gave testimony to Army investigation. Then nothing. He disappeared from the records. Just gone. You need to understand why this matters. That last name, Vásquez, the same as hers. The connection she's been half hoping for and half dreading. The light dies. Outside, coyotes call, too many of them, their voices overlapping until they don't sound quite like coyotes anymore. Then she hears it. Footsteps on the floor above her. Slow, deliberate, pacing. The commissary is single-story. Eliana freezes. The steps continue back and forth for 30 seconds that feel like 30 minutes. The rhythm of someone measuring something or working through a problem that has no solution, that can never have a solution, that will be worked through for eternity without ever reaching an answer. Then the steps stop. She waits in silence, heart pounding. Building settling, she tells herself. Except the temperature hasn't changed. She gathers her things. Outside, stars are sharp and bright. The security guard is gone. His truck is gone. She's alone with 825,000 acres of darkness. She has the clear feeling that something is watching her work, has been watching her since she arrived, maybe watching everyone who comes here, trying to make sense of what can't be explained away with appraisal reports and market valuations. As she drives back to Kingsville, she keeps checking her rearview mirror. Not for cars, for something else. For the feeling that follows her all the way back to the hotel, the feeling that Norias doesn't let go of people easily once they start asking questions. Chapter 2. The Numbers That Don't Add Up. Let me show you what happens when money meets mystery. Eliana's hotel in Kingsville is nicer than expected. The Henrietta Inn, $189 a night. She doesn't sleep, keeps hearing footsteps that can't exist, keeps thinking about that name. Thomas Vásquez. But you and I both know there are no coincidences in stories like this. Patricia Chen arrives at 8 carrying 2 laptops. You need to understand Patricia. She's 41, a forensic accountant who thinks in spreadsheets. Her flaws: she values money over meaning, dismisses emotional evidence as professional weakness, and genuinely can't understand why anyone would sacrifice profit for principle. These 2 women are about to discover something that will test both their flaws and their friendship. They've worked together on 3 previous appraisals. Patricia finds the numbers. Eliana finds the stories. Patricia spreads financial documents across the desk. King Ranch ledgers, payroll records, security expenditure reports from summer 1915. Her finger taps a highlighted section, walking Eliana through the pattern. Between May and July, payroll to Norias decreases while production increases, but security spending jumps. 15,000 in May, 20,000 in June, 25,000 in July. The ranch spent $60,000, over $1.7 million today, on additional security for Norias during the 3 months before the raid. 80% of total security spending went to one remote division. The raid was costly. Patricia pulls up another spreadsheet, continuing her analysis. Between July and October 1915, 62 documented raids along the Texas-Mexico border. 21 Americans killed, 15 ethnic Mexicans killed by Texas Rangers in retaliation. Property damage, over $1 million, $30 million today. The United States Army deployed 12,000 troops to the region. Think about that. 12,000 troops. More American soldiers than died in the violence itself. The Norias Raid is at the center of all this violence. Patricia opens a different file, revealing the deeper pattern. The ranch spent $120,000 total, $3.5 million in current dollars, on the Norias situation between May and August. That's not defensive spending, that's strategic investment. She pulls up land deed records. Between September 1915 and March the following year, King Ranch acquired 78,000 additional acres at an average of $2.12 per acre. Pre-raid market rates, $4 to $6 per acre. 78,000 acres purchased for $165,000 that should have cost $312,000 to $468,000. Minimum savings, $147,000, enough to fund a small war, or to profit from one. Current value of those acres at $1,500 to $2,000 per acre, $117 million to $156 million, from an investment of $165,000 in 1915. The raid is profitable, Patricia says. Just not for the raiders. This isn't just history. This is documented strategy. Violence weaponized for land acquisition. Patricia pulls out one more ledger. Norias Division Discretionary Funds, July 31st, 1915, $60,000 transferred to main office. The money isn't there, Patricia says, pointing to the entry. Transferred 6 days before the attack. The safe at Norias is empty, except for petty cash. 6 days, exactly 6 days before 40. Men rode toward money that was already gone. Either someone knew the raid was coming and moved the money as a precaution, which would require specific intelligence, or someone moved the money knowing the raid was coming and wanting to ensure it failed, which would require active manipulation. Either way, someone knew. Eliana's phone buzzes. Text from the consortium asking for timeline. Board meeting Thursday. Patricia is already packing up her laptops. She has a flight to Austin, meetings with the consortium's financial team. After Patricia leaves, Eliana sits alone with the documents. Thinks about Thomas Vásquez, about a foreman who defended people who didn't quite trust him against attackers who might have been family, about a man whose name appeared in records for 2 years, then vanished like smoke. She opens her laptop and starts searching archives. What she finds in those archives will make the financial manipulation look simple. Chapter 3. What the Archives Remember. Let me tell you about the peculiar silence of archives. The King Ranch headquarters archives smell of old paper and climate control. that chemical coldness of preserved documents, of history kept at exactly the right temperature and humidity so it doesn't crumble into dust. Eliana arrives Wednesday morning with a list of documents she needs. A research assistant, young, efficient, practiced at dealing with historians, leads her to a reading table and promises to pull files. The head archivist is away this week. Somehow that feels like relief. She's read his books while preparing for this appraisal, 4 volumes romanticizing ranch owners as civilizing forces, dismissing raiders as chaos incarnate. The kind of history that smooths over complications, that makes clear heroes and clear villains, that never questions whether civilization built on stolen land deserves the name. She settles in with employment records, payroll ledgers, incident reports. You need to understand the scale of what she's examining. The ranch employed 217 people in August 1915, owned 800,000 acres across multiple divisions, generated approximately $1.2 million annually from cattle sales alone, equivalent to over $34 million today. Raiders, from what evidence exists, operated on poverty. Hand-stitched ammunition pouches, rifles of mixed quality, receipts for beans and horse feed totaling $14 over 2 months. David with a slingshot versus Goliath in gold-plated armor. Except in this story, David doesn't win. David barely survives. And afterward, David's family loses their land while Goliath's empire expands. The research assistant returns with a folder containing survivor testimony from George Forbes, a ranch hand who was there that night. Eliana opens it carefully. Forbes's handwriting is cramped, urgent, the penmanship of someone who needs to get his version down before other versions become the official truth. His first entry describes the raid in stark terms. Raiders came at 2:30 in the morning, 40 or more men, machine gun fire. Tom Hardy killed. Forbes thought they'd all die. Vásquez kept his head, got them through. Vásquez. There's that name again. The man who defended the ranch. The man who disappeared from records. The man Eliana can't stop thinking about because maybe, just maybe, he's the reason her father won't talk about their family history. 2 weeks later, Forbes writes again. You can hear the frustration bleeding through a century of archived paper. Army investigators interrogated them, wanted to know who the raiders were, where they went. Forbes couldn't tell what he didn't know. He notes that Vásquez gave full testimony, said everything he knew. But some officers think Vásquez is in on the attack because he's Mexican, not because of evidence, not because of behavior, because of his name. Forbes emphasizes that he was there. He saw what happened. Vásquez fought for them, saved their lives, held the position when they were outnumbered 9-1. It doesn't matter to the investigators. The suspicion sticks like tar, like blood, like the way assumptions about loyalty and betrayal get written into official reports and become truth by repetition. Thomas Vásquez, caught between sides, trusted by the men he defended, suspected by the institution he served, fighting for people who needed him but didn't want to need him, proving himself over and over while knowing proof would never be enough. Eliana photographs every page, builds timelines, cross-references names. The afternoon light through archive windows turns golden, then amber, then dies the way it does in South Texas, sudden and total, darkness arriving like a judgment. She finds maps showing the Norias layout as it existed in 1915. Commissary, main house, bunkhouse, water tower, and defensive positions, marked in pencil, sight lines calculated, distances measured in yards. Someone prepared for an attack. The maps are dated July 28th. 11 days before the raid. Think about that. 11 days. Not general security improvements, not routine maintenance, specific defensive positions drawn up less than 2 weeks before 40 men attacked with rifles and a machine gun. Someone knew this was coming. Someone knew exactly what was coming and where to position defenders to survive it. She finds another document, Army intelligence report from early July, noting that intercepted communications suggest planned action against ranch properties near the border. Specific targets are unclear, but the Norias division is mentioned by name in 2 separate intercepts. The ranch knew. Not just suspected, knew, with specificity. With enough advance warning to fortify positions, move payroll, prepare defenses. With enough detail to turn what should have been a massacre into a survivable firefight. Eliana looks at the maps again. 4 to 6 defenders against 30 to 40 raiders. Tactically, the defenders should have been overwhelmed, overrun in minutes, but the defensive positions are perfectly placed, the sight lines clear, the ammunition stored strategically, every advantage given to the outnumbered side. Unless overwhelming the defenders wasn't the point, unless someone wanted the raiders to attack, wanted them to fail, wanted the violence that would follow to justify exactly the kind of military response and land acquisition that Patricia's spreadsheets document. She photographs everything. Outside, Kingsville's lights begin to glow against gathering darkness. The archive grows cold, the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning working too hard in old buildings, or the kind that comes from something else. The temperature drops noticeable degrees. Eliana's breath doesn't quite mist, but close. The lights flicker. Just once, just for a second, but enough to make her look up from her work. The archive is empty. The research assistant left hours ago. She's alone with documents that tell a story someone tried very hard to bury, and buildings remember, don't they? Buildings hold what happened in their walls, in their floors, in the spaces between rafters where sound echoes and dies, and maybe never completely dies. She packs her laptop. The archive grows colder still. She walks out into warm evening air, relieved to leave the cold behind, and drives back to the Henrietta Inn, thinking about maps dated 11 days before an attack, about intelligence reports, about $60,000 moved 6 days before it would have been stolen, about Thomas Vásquez defending a position that was deliberately prepared to be defensible, fighting men who might have been family to protect an institution that didn't trust him. Her phone buzzes, voicemail from her father. She called him yesterday, left a message asking if he knows anything about Thomas Vásquez. The voicemail is brief. Her father's voice is tight, careful, the tone he uses when discussing things that should stay buried. He tells her not to dig this up. "Some things should stay buried," he says, and hangs up without explaining what things, without saying whether Thomas Vásquez is family or stranger, without giving her anything except confirmation that yes, he knows something and no, he won't share it, which means yes, she's on the right track, which means this appraisal has just become personal in ways that will complicate everything, which means the choice she'll have to make about this property isn't just professional anymore. It's about family, about loyalty, about whose version of history deserves to be told. Chapter 4. The Grandmother's Truth. Let me tell you about the other side of this story. La Frontera House sits on a quiet street in Kingsville, a bed and breakfast that caters to hunting tourists willing to pay $350 a night for the illusion of authentic frontier experience. The website features photographs of exposed beams and hand-painted tiles, of antique furniture and modern luxury carefully balanced. Guest reviews praise the genuine Texas heritage and unparalleled access to premium hunting leases. Weekend packages run $5,000 and include guided hunts, gourmet meals, and the kind of carefully curated history that wealthy people consume like wine. Maria Canales owns the property, 71, elegantly dressed, with eyes that hold old anger like coals that never quite go out. She has 3 flaws that shape her life and her business. She holds grudges that outlast their usefulness, still angry about things that happened before she was born, carrying her grandfather's resentments like inherited jewelry. She refuses to let anyone tell her family's story except her, has sued historians who got details wrong, publicly confronted documentary makers who didn't present her grandfather's motives correctly, and she runs her business with such fierce control that her own children moved away rather than work for her, couldn't breathe under the weight of her standards, her expectations, her need to manage every detail of how the past is presented. What the website doesn't mention, Maria's grandfather rode with the Raiders. His name was Alejandro Canales. He was 23 years old in August 1915. He kept receipts to prove he paid for things honestly. And he died 53 years later, carrying the weight of one night's violence that didn't accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish, that got good men killed for nothing, that changed exactly nothing except to make things worse. Eliana finds Maria in the bed and breakfast's courtyard garden, pruning roses while guests sleep off the previous night's bourbon and boar hunt. Maria looks up, assesses Eliana with the wariness of someone who's learned to be careful about who tells her family's story, who's been burned by journalists and historians who wanted the dramatic parts without the context, the violence without the desperation. The heritage consultant working on the Norias appraisal, Maria says. It isn't a question. Eliana nods. Maria sets down her pruning shears without further preamble, leads Eliana inside to a private sitting room where guests aren't allowed, where the carefully curated frontier aesthetic drops away, and what remains is just furniture and photographs and the accumulated weight of someone who's spent decades trying to make sense of what her grandfather did. She pulls out a wooden box from a locked cabinet. Inside, receipts, dozens of them, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Each one a small piece of evidence that someone cared about honor even when the world saw him as dishonorable, that someone wanted proof he wasn't a thief even when he was preparing to participate in what history would call a raid, a robbery, an act of terrorism. June 15th, 1915, 5 pounds of beans, 32 cents. June 23rd, ammunition, 40 rounds, $2.20. July 2nd, horse feed, 8 pounds, 18 cents. July 18th, rifle repair, $1.50. You need to understand what these receipts represent. In an era where many raids were indeed robberies, where border violence often was about theft and profit, here's a young man keeping documentation of every penny spent, as if receipts could protect him, as if proof of honest transactions before the violence could justify the violence itself, as if any of it could change how history would remember him. My grandfather is Alejandro Canales, Maria says without emotion. 23 years old in August 1915. He rides with the men who attack the ranch. He keeps receipts to prove he pays for things honestly. Even when the world sees him as a criminal, he wants evidence of his honor. One receipt stands out. August 1st, 1915, Hotel La Reforma, Matamoros, Mexico. Lodging, one night, 50 cents. Meeting to plan the attack, Maria explains. About 15 men in a hotel room. Leaders explain the plan to San Diego, assign targets, distribute what weapons they have. The Plan de San Diego. You need to know what that was. A revolutionary document calling for the return of territories Mexico lost to the United States. A plan to organize Mexican Americans and other minorities to take back land stolen in the Mexican-American War. A plan that was wildly unrealistic, impossibly ambitious, and spoke to real grievances about dispossession and injustice. Whether it was a genuine revolutionary movement or a provocation created by intelligence services is still debated. Whether the men who died believing in it were revolutionaries or pawns depends on who's telling the story. August 7th. $3 for supplies, Brownsville General Store. Final provisioning, the day before they ride toward Norias. $14 total over 2 months, Maria says. That's what revolution costs him. Everything he has. $14. The ranch spent $120,000 preparing for the same night. Someone knew this was coming, and someone wanted these men to come anyway, wanted them to attack, wanted them to fail, wanted the violence that would justify the crackdown that was already planned, the land seizures that were already being negotiated, the military response that 12,000 troops were already preparing to execute. Eliana looks at the receipts, at the careful documentation of desperate poverty. She thinks about the consortium's prospectus in her laptop bag, casitas starting at $2,400 per night, built on land where men who couldn't afford horse feed fought men who owned more acres than countries. Maria pulls out a letter, handwritten in Spanish. She translates as she reads, her voice steady but carrying weight like someone hauling stones uphill, like someone who has read this letter so many times the words have worn grooves in her heart. My grandson asks if I regret the raid at Norias. I tell him I regret that we failed. Not because of the violence, I've seen enough violence to last 1,000 lifetimes, but because we had a chance to fight back against injustice, and we weren't prepared enough, organized enough, or lucky enough to succeed. We had will, but not way, and will without way is just getting people killed for nothing. The letter is dated 1968. Alejandro Canales lived 53 more years after the raid, carrying that weight. 53 years of knowing he participated in something that changed nothing, that made things worse, that got Tom Hardy killed and gave the ranch exactly the excuse it needed to acquire 78,000 acres at below-market prices. Think about living with that knowledge, about believing you were fighting for justice and discovering you were a tool someone else used for profit, about surviving when good men died and then watching their families lose their land, their homes, their place in the world. Maria's voice goes harder. Everyone asks about the $60,000, as if that's what matters, as if revolution can be reduced to a robbery gone wrong. Eliana chooses her words carefully. Did your grandfather know the money was moved? He doesn't know why they leave it, Maria says. Says there's confusion about objectives. Some want to burn buildings, some want prisoners, some just want to survive. Nobody agrees. What he does know is that they're told there's payroll at Norias, told by someone who claims to have inside information. Whether that someone is trying to help them or trap them, he never finds out. Inside information. Someone told them the money would be there. Someone gave them intelligence that was either outdated or deliberately false. Someone pointed them at a target that was prepared and waiting. Maria closes the wooden box carefully. My family lost 12,000 acres in 1836. Spanish land grant, not recognized by Texas courts after independence. We go from landowners to workers in one generation. My grandfather believes the Plan de San Diego can reverse that. Is it realistic? No, but desperation doesn't care about realistic. After leaving La Frontera house, Eliana drives to a coffee shop and pulls up the consortium's market research. South Texas heritage tourism generates approximately $480 million annually. Hunting leases on private ranches average $8,000 to $15,000 per hunter per season. Luxury ranch stays, the kind the consortium wants to build at Norias, represent the premium tier. Guests willing to pay for authenticity without discomfort, for history without horror, for stories that make them feel connected to something real without requiring them to grapple with anything that might disturb their vacation. The question is whether the Norias history is the kind people will pay premium rates to experience, or the kind that will keep them away. Or, and this is what Eliana's beginning to suspect, the kind that reveals too much about how American prosperity was built to be comfortable for anyone. Maria has built a successful business selling carefully curated heritage to wealthy hunters. But she's done it by not advertising that her grandfather killed a man on land now valued at over $100 million, by presenting frontier history without mentioning which side her family was on, and by letting her guests believe they're consuming authentic Texas heritage when they're actually consuming a carefully edited version where all the complications have been smoothed away. Eliana's phone buzzes. Text from Patricia saying she's found something else in the financial records, something that makes the land acquisitions look like just the beginning. Chapter 5. The Physical Evidence. Let me show you what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. Eliana returns to Norias alone on Saturday morning. The security guard, older than the first one, with eyes equally haunted, hands her the commissary key with a warning that storm clouds are building. "Be gone before it hits," he advises. She nods, unlocks the commissary, steps into air that's cooler than outside. The thick walls doing their job, or something else making the temperature drop. You've felt this before, haven't you? That coldness in old buildings that has nothing to do with architecture, that comes from somewhere else entirely, that makes the back of your neck prickle even when you don't believe in ghosts. She's come to photograph documents, but also to walk the property, to see it the way potential guests will see it. The consortium's architectural plans show where casitas will be built, where the infinity pool will go, where the main lodge will stand. She needs to determine if the history enhances or diminishes the experience of standing on this ground. The commissary still bears scars. Bullet holes in the wooden walls, preserved behind protective glass, now but still visible. You can run your fingers near them, not touching, never touching, but close enough to feel the violence they represent. 110 years later, the violence is still written in wood, still visible, still present in a way that no amount of luxury renovation can erase. Military investigators collected over 400 spent shell casings from the raid site, 273 from defender positions, 146 from estimated raider locations. The machine gun alone fired approximately 120 rounds based on ammunition remnants found at the firing position 400 yards from the commissary. The attack lasted between 45 and 60 minutes, according to synchronized testimony from 3 survivors, 4 defenders against 35 to 40 raiders, ratio of roughly 1 to 9. Yet only 1 defender died. You need to think about what that means. Either extraordinary defensive advantage, poor raider marksmanship, or tactical confusion that prevented effective offensive action. Or the defenders knew exactly where to position themselves 11 days in advance. Eliana walks the property, following the sight lines marked on those July 28th maps. Stands where the machine gun would have been positioned. Looks back at the commissary and understands. From this spot, in darkness, with muzzle flash and smoke and chaos. Hitting defended positions would have required either incredible luck or daylight neither side had. The defensive positions, though, those have clean lines of fire, clear coverage, overlapping fields. Someone who knows tactics placed them perfectly. Someone who anticipated not just that an attack was coming, but how it would develop, where the raiders would be, what they would try to do. Wind picks up. Storm clouds gather on the horizon, dark and heavy. The air smells electric, the way it does before South Texas storms that roll in fast and violent and wash everything clean or destroy it trying. She should leave. But the commissary pulls at her. One more look at the documents inside. One more chance to find something that makes sense of all this. Inside, the temperature has dropped further. Her breath doesn't quite mist, but close. And you know what's coming, don't you? You can feel it building like the storm outside, like the pressure before thunder, like the moment before something fundamental changes. The footsteps start, slow, deliberate, pacing above her in a building that has no second floor, that has never had a second floor, that can't have anyone walking above it but does anyway, has for decades, will continue to for as long as the building stands. Eliana stands very still, listening. The sound is unmistakable this time. Not building settling, not wind, not imagination or stress or the power of suggestion. Footsteps, back and forth with the rhythm of someone measuring something or working through a problem that has no solution. Someone who's been working through that problem for 110 years. She pulls out her phone, starts recording audio. If she's going to include this in the appraisal, and she's beginning to think she has to, she needs documentation. Evidence. Something that can't be explained away as one person's subjective experience. The steps continue for what feels like hours, but is probably 2 minutes. Then stop. In the silence that follows, she hears something else. A voice, speaking Spanish. Too quiet to make out words, but the cadence is clear. Someone reciting something, or praying, or repeating the same phrase over and over like a litany, like a confession, like an explanation that no one will ever hear or believe. The voice stops. Then the temperature drops further. Suddenly, dramatically. Her breath mists now, clearly visible. The room goes cold enough that she starts shivering despite the September heat outside, cold enough that she can see her breath forming clouds, cold enough that it's measurable, documentable, undeniable. The voice starts again, closer. No estaba allí, it says. No estaba. It wasn't there. It wasn't there. Thunder rumbles outside. The storm is close. Eliana backs toward the door, still recording, every rational explanation cycling through her mind. Sound carrying from elsewhere. Psychological suggestion. Equipment malfunction. The power of knowing what happened here, creating auditory hallucinations, temperature sensitivity, the kind of experience that feels supernatural but has mundane causes if you look hard enough. But her breath is misting. That's measurable, real, documented on her phone's temperature app. 79 degrees outside, 52 degrees in this room. A 27-degree differential in a building with no active cooling, in a space that should be losing heat to outside air, not gaining cold from nowhere. Then she sees it. Just for a moment, in the corner near where the safe would have been, a shape. Not quite solid, not quite transparent. The suggestion of a man standing with his back to her, head bowed, shoulders slumped in an attitude of defeat or exhaustion or endless explanation that nobody will hear. She blinks. Gone. Temperature returns to normal so fast she wonders if she imagined the cold. The voice stops. The footsteps resume briefly above her, then fade. Eliana stands in the suddenly empty room, shaking. She checks her equipment. Audio recorder has captured everything. Phone temperature log shows the drop and recovery. Photographs showing that unusual distortion in one frame. A blur that shouldn't be there, that looks almost like a man, but could be lens flare or dust or any number of mundane explanations. She has evidence. Measurable, recordable, verifiable evidence of something happening in this building that can't be easily explained. The question is what to do with it. She packs up as rain starts, locks the commissary, returns the key. The security guard is waiting in his truck, engine running. He looks at her face and knows. He tells her lots of people hear it. Always the same words. Some think it's Thomas Vásquez, still trying to explain the money that wasn't there. He keeps trying to make people understand he couldn't stop what was going to happen because the whole reason for it didn't exist. When Eliana asks if he believes that, he shrugs. He believes something happened here that never got resolved. Maybe that's a ghost. Maybe that's just trauma soaked into the walls, deep enough that the building remembers. Either way, many people who come here experience the same things. Eliana drives back to Kingsville in rain so heavy she can barely see the road. She keeps thinking about her recording, about measurable evidence of something that shouldn't exist, about how she'll write that into an appraisal without sounding like she's lost her mind, and about whether a luxury resort can exist in a place where the past is literally still present, still pacing back and forth, still trying to explain itself across a century of misunderstanding. Chapter 6. The Development Plans. Let me show you how luxury turns tragedy into profit. The consortium's full proposal arrives Sunday morning. 300 pages, leather-bound. The weight of money speaking to money. Eliana spreads it across her hotel room desk and starts reading. Norias Heritage Resort, a premium frontier experience. 10 luxury casitas ranging from 1,200 to 2,000 square feet. Main lodge with restaurant, bar, library, and authentic historical artifacts. Infinity pool and spa overlooking the exact location where the 1915 raid occurred. Guided historical tours included with every stay. Projected development cost, $42 million. Projected time to break even at 60% occupancy, 7 years. Projected 20-year return on investment, 328%. Think about those numbers. 328% return over 20 years from turning a site of violence into a site of vacation. The target demographic: ultra-high net worth individuals aged 45 to 70. Median household income over $2 million annually. Willing to pay premium rates for exclusive access to historically significant locations. Authentic American heritage. But whose heritage? Whose authenticity? The comparable properties section lists examples that make the strategy clear. The resort at Paws Up in Montana, $1,800 per night. Blackberry Farm in Tennessee, up to $3,000 per night. Vermejo in New Mexico, rates available only by inquiry. All of them selling the same thing, history and landscape packaged for consumption by people wealthy enough to afford it. The Norias proposal includes sample guest itineraries that make Eliana's stomach turn. Day 1. Welcome reception. Guided sunset tour of raid site, standing where Tom Hardy died while sipping champagne. Day 2. Cattle drive participation, heritage firearms instruction, starlight dinner at location of defensive positions, You can literally eat gourmet meals at the spot where 4 men fought for their lives. Day 3. Tactical history experience where guests can participate in recreated defensive scenarios. Descendants. Like Maria, whose grandfather rode with the raiders. Like Eliana, whose ancestor might have defended against them. Financial projections are detailed and depressingly thorough. Average length of stay projected at 3.2 nights. Average spending per guest, including accommodations, meals, and premium experiences, $8,400. With 3,200 guests annually at 60% occupancy, gross revenue of $26.8 million. Operating costs of $14.5 million, net annual profit of $12.3 million. The consortium has done their homework. The market exists. The demand is proven. The business model is sound. All of it is possible if Eliana signs off on an appraisal that reduces complicated history to simple asset valuation. Eliana opens her laptop, pulls up her notes. She has documented evidence of strategic advance preparation, financial manipulation, a payroll moved 6 days before it would have been stolen, intelligence reports, maps dated 11 days before the attack, and unexplained phenomena that multiple witnesses have experienced. She has an audio recording of a voice saying it wasn't there in an empty building. She has receipts showing raiders spent $14 preparing to attack a property that spent $120,000 preparing to be attacked. She has a proposal to turn all of it into luxury hospitality, generating $12 million annually. Her phone rings. Patricia. Patricia asks if she received the full proposal. Eliana confirms she's reading it now. Thoughts? Patricia asks. Eliana looks at the architectural renderings. The infinity pool positioned so guests can swim while looking at the spot where Tom Hardy died. She admits the business model is sound, but she doesn't know how to write an appraisal that accounts for everything without killing the deal. Patricia's voice carries carefully controlled patience when she asks about the financial manipulation. But Eliana means all of it, the manipulation, the phenomena, the fact that this place is still processing violence 110 years ago. The phenomena? Patricia says flatly. You're not seriously considering including ghost stories in a professional appraisal? Eliana has an audio recording, temperature data, multiple witnesses. Patricia dismisses it as old building sounds, psychological suggestion. Which could be a feature, not a bug, Patricia says. Heritage tourism loves a good ghost story. This isn't a good ghost story, Patricia. This is unresolved trauma. Silence on the line. Patricia finally speaks. Their job is to determine market value, not moral value. The market doesn't care about complexity. It cares about whether wealthy people will pay premium rates. Eliana needs more time. The board meets Thursday. Patricia's tone sharpens when Eliana says to tell them it's complicated. After disconnecting, Eliana sits with the proposal open in front of her. Thinks about Norias Vásquez pacing in an empty building, repeating the same words across a century. Thinks about Alejandro Canales keeping receipts to prove his honor. The consortium wants an answer by Thursday, but what Eliana writes in that appraisal will determine whether this place becomes a luxury resort or something else entirely. Chapter 7. The Framework. We Build. Let me tell you something about stories. That night, Eliana sits in her hotel room and starts writing something that isn't the appraisal. She's been thinking about the newspapers, about how they constructed a narrative that seemed objective, just reporting facts, while actually building the framework that made land seizures legal. And she realizes she's doing the same thing. You need to understand what's happening here. This story you're following, the heritage consultant who discovers her family connection at exactly the right moment, who meets exactly the right people to explain each piece, it's a construction, not fabrication. The history is real. Thomas Vasquez is real, documented in Army archives, his testimony preserved in military records. The raid happens August 8, 1915, 2:30 in the morning. Tom Hardy dies, others survive. Violence escalates. Between 300 and 1,000 people are killed in the broader conflict, depending on whose count you believe, whose bodies get included, whose deaths matter enough to document. But Eliana Vásquez is presented here. She's a framework, a way to investigate real history through modern eyes. She represents researchers who've spent years trying to understand Norias, descendants who carry these stories in their families, who grow up knowing that something terrible happened but not knowing exactly what or why. Maria Canales' grandfather really is Alejandro, really rides with the raiders, really keeps those receipts. But Maria herself, running her luxury bed and breakfast while carrying generational bitterness, she's a composite. She represents families on both sides processing trauma, finding ways to survive. Patricia Chen, with her spreadsheets and need for quantifiable truth, she's every forensic accountant who's looked at historical financial records and found patterns that shift our understanding of what really happened. The choice to tell this through Eliana's investigation, through Maria's memory, through Patricia's analysis, that's narrative construction. But the history they're uncovering is documented fact. The financial records showing $120,000 in security preparation, the intelligence reports warning of attacks, the maps dated 11 days before the raid, the payroll transferred 6 days before it would have been stolen, the land acquisitions at below-market prices in the months following. All real, all documented, all verifiable in archives. The voices at Norias, whether supernatural echoes or acoustic phenomena or psychological response, they say what witnesses have reported for decades. It wasn't there. The money, the clear justification, the simple answer that would make the violence meaningful. This framework, Eliana and Patricia and Maria, it's a way to examine real questions. Is the Norias raid revolution or banditry? Maybe it's both. Maybe neither. Maybe it's desperate people using political framework to act on economic desperation, walking into a trap set by people with better intelligence and strategic interests in provoking exactly the kind of violence that would justify federal intervention. People like Eliana exist. Researchers who find family connections to historical events, who struggle with how to value land that holds violence, who hear things in old buildings and don't know if they're experiencing genuine phenomena or psychological response, who have to choose between professional success and personal integrity. The characters are constructions, but the history is real. The violence is real. The consequences are real. The question is real. Eliana saves the document, looks at it for a long time. This realization changes her approach. The consortium wants her to construct a simple narrative, but every narrative is a construction. The question isn't whether to construct, it's whether the construction serves truth or profit, whether it honors the people who lived it or just uses them. The newspapers in 1915 constructed a narrative that served profit, made land seizures legal, made violence justifiable, made Mexican Americans suspect by default, made revolution look like robbery and terrorism look like something that required overwhelming military response. She can construct a narrative that serves truth, acknowledges complexity, refuses simplification, honors the people on all sides who were caught in something bigger than themselves, who made choices under pressure, who lived with consequences they never chose. That's the difference. Evidence she needs to examine before Thursday's board meeting. Chapter 8. The Newspapers. Remember, let me show you how official history gets written. Monday morning, Eliana drives to College Station. Texas, A&M's library holds newspaper archives from the border region, 1915 through 1920. Microfilm reels contain the first draft of history. Patricia's financial data showed the ranch profited. The maps showed they prepared. But Eliana needs to understand how violence became justification for seizing 137 family properties across 6 counties. The newspapers hold that answer. She sets up at a microfilm reader, begins scrolling through August 1915 editions, and there it is, history being constructed in real time, narrative being built line by line. The headlines set the narrative immediately. Mexican bandits attack King Ranch, declares the August 9th edition. Raiders kill innocent ranch hand in cowardly night attack, follows on August 10th. Armed insurrectionists threaten border security, warns the August 12th paper. 3 different newspapers, 3 days, same exact story. Almost like someone gave them the same press release. You need to see how this works. The newspapers don't investigate. They report what they're told. They accept the version provided by ranch management, by Army officials, by people with institutional power to define what happened. The raiders are bandits, not revolutionaries. The attack is cowardly, not desperate. The threat is insurrection, not resistance to dispossession. Words matter. Frame matters. Who gets to tell the story matters more than any single fact. But buried in the articles, a different story emerges. The August 9th piece mentions in paragraph 7 that raiders are believed associated with a revolutionary movement operating under Plan de San Diego. Paragraph 7 follows 6 paragraphs establishing them as bandits. Revolutionary activity reframed as banditry. Political grievance becomes criminal enterprise. Every editorial in the week following calls for increased military presence. Everyone cites Norias as evidence of border danger requiring federal response. Everyone uses the same language, the same framing, the same conclusion. None mention land theft that preceded violence. The violence comes fast in the newspaper's passive voice. Rangers neutralize suspected raiders. 7 men killed near Brownsville. No names given, no families notified. Just neutralized like they were a chemical reaction. Law enforcement cleans up bandit threat. 12 detained, 5 killed while attempting escape. Border violence decreases under Ranger pressure. Uncounted deaths described as necessary measures. Nobody doing the killing in these headlines. It just happens. But death notices scattered through back pages tell a different story. Jose Martinez, age 34, killed by Rangers near Mission, survived by wife and 4 children. Roberto Hernandez, age 19, killed by Rangers near Mercedes. No family listed. Did he have no family, or did no family dare claim him? Eliana photographs everything. The headlines and the death notices, the editorials and the buried qualifications. She finds property transaction notices too. Starting in September, the pattern becomes clear. But here's what makes it work. The transaction notices run on page 12. The editorials demanding border security run on page 1. The death notices of suspected bandits run on page 8. The sequence matters. First, establish threat. Second, eliminate threat. Third, quietly transfer property while nobody's paying attention, while everyone's still scared. Between September 1915 and March 1916, county records show 137 land parcels changed from Mexican-American to Anglo ownership. Average sale price, $1.87 per acre. Average assessed value just 6 months earlier, $4.32 per acre. Total acreage transferred, approximately 214,000 acres. Total discount from assessed value, over $523,000, $15.6 million in today's money. 137 families, 6 months. All after one night of violence that the newspapers said required overwhelming response, that justified ranger patrols and military occupation, that made Mexican Americans suspect until proven otherwise. Kennedy County alone sees 28 forced sales or tax seizures of Mexican-American properties in the 4 months following the raid. Before August, the county averaged 3 such transactions per year. After August, that rate increases nearly tenfold. That's not market forces. That's systematic dispossession using violence as justification. The newspapers don't call it what it is. They call it market adjustment and property consolidation. They don't mention that the unrest created the opportunity for consolidation, but more importantly, they don't mention that the newspaper coverage itself created the legal and social framework that made these seizures possible. Without headlines screaming threat, local judges don't have public pressure to approve emergency tax sales. Without editorials demanding law and order, rangers don't have carte blanche to eliminate suspects without trial. The financial manipulation Patricia found was one layer. This is the layer beneath it, the media infrastructure that transforms violence into profit, into law. By the time she leaves, her eyes ache from the microfilm reader's glow. But she has what she needs. Documentation of how violence is transformed into profit, is transformed into history, is transformed into heritage that can be sold to tourists. The consortium wants to build on that tradition, wants to sell the same history the newspapers sold in 1915, just with better amenities and higher rates. But there's a pattern in these newspaper archives she hasn't told Patricia about yet. A pattern that suggests someone knew exactly what they were doing. Someone orchestrated not just the violence, but the response to the violence. Not just the raid, but the media coverage and the legal framework and the land acquisitions that followed. Someone planned all of it, and the board meeting is in 2 days. Chapter 9. The Financial Trail. Let me tell you about ultimatums. Patricia returns from Austin Tuesday morning looking tired and frustrated. The board meeting wasn't just discussion, it was ultimatum, the moment when all the polite language drops away and power shows its face. They meet for breakfast at the hotel. Patricia orders black coffee and doesn't touch it. Her hands are shaking slightly. You've seen this before in people who've just realized they're in deeper than they thought, who've discovered that the job they thought was straightforward has teeth they didn't see coming. Patricia tells her the board wants simple. Revolutionary raid or bandit attack, one or the other. They can market either story. What they can't market is it's complicated. Eliana pushes eggs around her plate. Outside, Kingsville is waking up. Trucks heading to ranches, tourists walking toward the King Ranch Museum, the ordinary business of a town built on selling its history, on packaging the past for consumption, on making money from other people's suffering without acknowledging the suffering part. When Eliana asks what Patricia told them, Patricia sets down her coffee cup and explains. The evidence suggests both. The raiders have genuine political motivations, but also practical need for funds. The ranch has advance warning and prepares strategically. The aftermath benefits certain parties enormously. She pulls out a folder. Inside, the board's specific requirements for Thursday's presentation, legal language, contract terms, the kind of documents that turn professional relationships into liability management, that make everything official and binding and consequential. Patricia explains the board's response. They want to know if Eliana can prove the ranch deliberately provokes the raid. Because if she can't prove it, they don't want it in the appraisal. Prove it, like a court case, like the burden of proof is on the victims of injustice, to prove the injustice happened, to demonstrate that their suffering wasn't random or deserved or their own fault. Like the courts that didn't recognize Spanish land grants, like the courts that justified every land seizure that followed. Eliana points to what they have. The intelligence reports, the defensive maps dated 11 days before, the security spending concentrated on Norias specifically, the payroll moved 6 days before, the land acquisitions immediately after. Patricia's response is measured, all of which suggests preparation, not provocation. There's a difference, legally and ethically. Patricia opens the folder wider, shows Eliana the board's exact language. Consultant will provide binary determination, historical asset or liability. Ambiguous findings will constitute breach of contract per Section 4.2, penalty clauses, legal exposure. The kind of contract terms that mean if Eliana doesn't give them what they want, they'll sue her into oblivion, destroy her business, make sure she never works in heritage consulting again. This isn't just about the appraisal anymore. This is about her career, her livelihood, her future. This is about whether she can afford to have principles when principles have costs. Eliana poses a question. What if the raiders are fed information about the payroll? What if someone tells them there will be $60,000 at Norias, knowing it will be moved? Patricia leans back in her chair, asks if Eliana can prove that. Eliana can't. Then it's speculation, Patricia says. And speculation is what they'll use to invoke Section 4.2 to sue you for breach and ruin your reputation. Eliana's phone buzzes. Text from the consortium's lead investor. They need final timeline. Development team is ready to move forward pending her appraisal. Architect standing by. Contractors lined up. Millions of dollars waiting on her signature on a document that reduces 100 years of suffering to asset or liability. She shows Patricia the text. Patricia's voice softens slightly. Eliana can say no. She's an independent consultant. When Eliana asks if she really can, Patricia nods slowly. She can, but she knows how it works. Say no often enough, you stop getting hired. Say no to the wrong client, and word spreads. You'll be marked as difficult, as unreliable, as someone who lets personal feelings interfere with professional judgment. You'll be done. Eliana knows. She's built her business on being thorough but manageable, on delivering complexity in digestible form, on giving clients truth they can use instead of truth that costs them money. She's made compromises before, every consultant does, emphasized favorable details, downplayed complications, framed histories in ways that served her clients' interests while staying technically accurate. This feels different. This feels personal in ways that make her question whether she can deliver anything they'll accept, whether she should deliver anything they'll accept, whether some stories deserve to be told whole or not at all. After breakfast, Eliana drives out of Kingsville toward open country where her phone has no signal. She parks on a farm road and sits in silence. The kind of silence that lets you hear yourself think, that forces you to confront what you've been avoiding, that makes decisions you don't want to make feel inevitable. She thinks about her father's voicemail. Don't dig this up, Some things should stay buried, but some things won't stay buried. Some things keep pushing up through the soil no matter how hard you pack the earth down, no matter how carefully you try to forget, no matter how many years pass. Thomas Vásquez, pacing in that commissary for 110 years, is proof of that. The land remembers even when people try to forget. She thinks about Thomas Vásquez. He was a foreman who earned more than most ethnic Mexicans could earn in that time by being better than anyone else at a job that required being trusted by people who didn't want to trust him. He fought because not fighting would have confirmed every suspicion about his loyalty, about how he left within 6 months, moved away, and never talked about Norias again. He disappeared from records as if he never existed, like the land itself rejected him for knowing too much, for being too complicated, for refusing to be simply a hero or simply a villain. About how everyone involved believed they were doing what had to be done, yet each was wrong in different ways. The ranch defended property they'd acquired through methods that look increasingly questionable. The raiders fought for justice through violence that served their enemies' purposes. Thomas was caught between, trying to serve both sides and trusted by neither. The board meeting is tomorrow, and Eliana still has one more trip to make to Norias, one more chance to find out what really happened in that commissary, to understand what Thomas Vásquez is trying to say across a century of silence, to decide whether she'll tell his story or let it stay buried the way her father thinks it should. Chapter 10. Where Evidence Lives. Let me show you what it means to choose documentation over doubt. Eliana goes back to Norias Wednesday afternoon. Storm clouds building again, the air electric with the kind of tension that comes before South Texas storms that change everything or nothing at all. The board meeting is tomorrow morning. If she's going to mention the phenomena in her appraisal, and she's decided she has to, she can't pretend it doesn't exist just because it's inconvenient. She needs more than her own experience. She needs data, measurements, something that can't be dismissed as imagination or stress or one person's subjective response to knowing what happened in a place. She needs evidence that will stand up in court if the consortium sues her, evidence that will protect her from Section 4.2, evidence that makes the truth undeniable even when denial would be more profitable. This time she brings equipment. Electromagnetic field detector, digital thermometer to measure temperature fluctuations, professional audio recorder, cameras with timestamp verification. If she's going to document phenomena, she'll do it properly, scientifically, in a way that even Patricia's spreadsheet mind can't dismiss, that even the consortium's lawyers can't argue away. The security guard who gives her the key looks at the equipment, then her face. He asks if she's going to prove it's real. She meets his eyes, explains that she's going to prove something happened. Whether it's real or not, people experience it. That affects property value, guest experience, liability. The consortium needs to know what they're buying. He nods slowly, asks if the board meeting is tomorrow. Word travels fast in small towns. Or maybe he's just seen enough consultants come through here with equipment and determination to know how the story usually ends. She doesn't answer, just takes the key. Inside the commissary, she sets up methodically. Temperature sensors in multiple locations. Audio recorder positioned near where she heard the voice. Electromagnetic field detector running baseline measurements. Everything logged, everything time-stamped, everything documented in a way that will survive legal challenge. Then she sits down to wait. You need to understand what this feels like. Sitting in a building where violence happened, where people died, where the past won't stay past. Waiting for something that might be supernatural, or might be psychological, or might be environmental, but that either way affects how humans interact with this space, waiting to document what shouldn't exist so that powerful people can't pretend it doesn't. The building is quiet for the first hour. Normal sounds, wind through gaps in the walls, metal roof expanding in heat, then contracting as clouds cover the sun. Her thermometers show consistent cooling as the storm approaches. Nothing unusual, nothing she can't explain. She reviews the consortium's site visit schedule on her laptop. They want to walk the property Friday afternoon, want her to identify where key historical moments occurred so they can position casitas accordingly, want to know which locations will photograph best for marketing materials. They want to turn suffering into Instagram backgrounds, want to make violence aesthetic. The footsteps start. She looks at her watch. 2:37 in the afternoon, almost exactly 110 years and 11 hours after the raid began. The same time Thomas Vásquez counted shell casings and wondered why they left the money, why they attacked at all, why everything he tried to prevent happened exactly as he feared it would. The sound comes from above, slow, deliberate, pacing. She checks her audio recorder. Green light showing it's capturing everything. Temperature readings starting to drop. Electromagnetic field detector still reading baseline. Whatever this is, it's not electromagnetic. The pacing continues, back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm of someone measuring something or working through a problem that has no solution, that can never have a solution, no matter how many times you pace it through. She checks thermometers. Temperature dropping. Not dramatically yet, but measurably. 3 degrees in 30 seconds, 5 degrees in a minute, 7 degrees, 9 degrees, 12 degrees below baseline. Then the voice speaks. No estaba Ali, it says. No estaba Ali. It wasn't there. Her audio recorder's light is flickering, picking up sound outside normal range, frequencies that human ears barely register but that recording equipment captures, that prove something is happening even if we can't agree what it means. She pulls out her phone, takes photographs. The images look normal, just an empty room with old documents and dust motes in the air. But one photograph, when she reviews it immediately, shows something unusual, just barely visible near the corner, a distortion in the light, a blur that shouldn't be there, that looks almost like a figure but could be lens flare or dust or any number of mundane explanations that don't quite fit the specific way the blur is shaped. She speaks aloud, feeling foolish but committed. She asks if it's Thomas. The pacing stops. Silence follows. Complete silence. Even the wind outside goes quiet. Even the metal roof stops creaking. Even her own breath seems loud in the sudden absence of every other sound. Then, clearly, distinctly, close enough that she can hear it without the recorder, the voice speaks again. No estaba Ali. Intenté decirles. No estaba Ali. It wasn't there. I tried to tell them. It wasn't there. I tried to tell them. Who? The raiders before they attacked? The ranch management after? The army investigators who suspected him because of his name? Everyone who needed to understand that this whole thing happened over money that didn't exist, over intelligence that was false or outdated, over a trap that someone set and 40 men walked into because they were desperate enough to believe it was real. Thunder rumbles outside. The storm is close. Temperature spikes back to normal in seconds. The voice stops. The presence, whatever it is, whoever it is gone as suddenly as it arrived, leaving only evidence. Measurable, recordable, verifiable evidence of something happening in this building that can't be easily explained away. She stands in the suddenly empty room. shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From the weight of it. From the responsibility of knowing something that will complicate everything, that will make the consortium's simple narrative impossible, that will force her to choose between profit and truth. She checks her equipment one more time. Audio recorder has captured everything. Thermometers show the temperature drop and recovery 12 degrees down, then back to baseline in under 10 seconds, which is physically impossible in a building this size with this much thermal mass, unless something other than ambient temperature change is happening. Electromagnetic field detector still quiet, ruling out electrical causes. Photographs showing that blur, that distortion, that something in the corner. She has evidence. The kind that will survive scrutiny. The kind that can't be dismissed as one person's subjective experience or psychological suggestion or stress-induced hallucination. The question is what to do with it. She packs up as rain starts, locks the commissary, returns the key. The security guard is waiting in his truck, engine running, ready to leave before the storm hits full force. He looks at her face and knows. He tells her lots of people hear it, always the same words. Some think it's Norias Vásquez, still trying to explain the money that wasn't there, still trying to make people understand he couldn't stop what was going to happen because the whole reason for it didn't exist. Still trying to be believed when nobody wants to believe him, because the truth is too complicated, too uncomfortable, too expensive. When Eliana asks if he believes that, he shrugs. He believes something happened here that didn't get resolved. Maybe that's a ghost. Maybe that's just trauma soaked into the walls, deep enough that the building remembers. Either way, a lot of people who come here experience the same things. The consortium needs to know that their luxury resort guest will hear footsteps in buildings with no second floor, will feel cold that comes from nowhere, and will see things in corners that shouldn't be there. Whether you call it haunted, traumatized, or just old, doesn't change the guest experience. Eliana drives back through rain so heavy she can barely see the road, keeps thinking about her recordings. About measurable evidence of something that shouldn't exist but does, that defies easy explanation but can't be ignored, that will complicate the appraisal in ways the consortium won't want, but that truth requires. She wonders how she'll write that into an appraisal without sounding like she's lost her mind, but also without betraying what she documented, without pretending it doesn't matter just because it's inconvenient. She wonders whether a luxury resort can exist in a place where the past is literally still present, still pacing back and forth, still trying to explain itself across a century of misunderstanding. Whether some places should be left alone instead of turned into vacation destinations. Whether profit has limits or whether everything, including other people's suffering, is just raw material for those who can afford to process it. The board meeting is tomorrow morning, and Eliana still doesn't know what she'll say when they ask for her binary determination, asset or liability, profitable or problematic, worth building on or walking away from. But she knows what Norias Vásquez would want her to say, what Alejandro Canales would want her to say, and what the $14 in receipts, the $120,000 in preparation costs, and the $60,000 that wasn't there. All add up to when you stop pretending numbers tell simple stories. She knows what the truth is, even if she doesn't yet know whether she has the courage to tell it. Chapter 11. The binary question breaks. Let me show you what happens when you refuse to simplify complexity. Thursday morning, the consortium's board calls a video conference. Eliana sets up her laptop in the hotel room. Patricia joins from Austin, her face on screen looking as tired as Eliana feels, looking like she already knows how this will end and is bracing for the fallout. The board consists of 5 investors: Men with money who've made more money by knowing when to invest and when to walk away, when to take risks and when to cut losses, when to push forward and when to protect their capital. The lead investor, James Whitfield, opens the meeting without preamble, without pleasantries, without pretending this is anything other than what it is. A business decision where human considerations are relevant only insofar as they affect the bottom line. He appreciates the thoroughness of their investigation, he says, but they need clear guidance for the board. Is this property's history an asset or a liability for their development plans? Eliana feels every hour of the past 2 weeks. She feels the weight of every document she's photographed, every testimony she's read, every voice she's heard in empty buildings. She feels Thomas Vásquez pacing above her and Alejandro Canales riding toward a trap and Tom Hardy bleeding out for money that wasn't there. "It's both," she says. Whitfield leans toward his camera and asks her to clarify. "You need to understand what she's about to do. She's about to kill a $100 million deal. She's about to violate her contract. She's about to end her career as she knows it. And she's doing it anyway because some truths matter more than money. Some stories deserve to be told whole instead of sanitized. Some people who've been silenced for a century deserve finally to be heard." She explains that the history is real, documented, and complex. The raid is simultaneously a political action connected to the Plan de San Diego revolutionary movement and a poorly planned operation by desperately poor fighters. The ranch has advance warning and prepares defensive positions. The violence that follows kills an estimated 300 to 1,000 people and results in significant land transfers at below market prices. That complexity is the asset and the liability. You can't separate them. You can't have the marketable parts without the problematic parts. They're woven together. Whitfield frowns. They need her to choose one narrative and support it with her appraisal. Either this is a revolutionary action, which makes it historically significant and marketable, or it's banditry, which makes it dramatic frontier history. Both work for their purposes. What doesn't work is ambiguity. "The ambiguity is what's real," Eliana says. Another investor speaks up. "Reality is what we make of it," he says. They're asking her to help them construct a narrative that's historically defensible and commercially viable. That's what they're paying her for. Patricia leans forward on her screen, explaining with respect that the historical evidence doesn't support a simple narrative. They have documented proof of ranch spending $120,000 on security preparation, intelligence reports indicating specific knowledge of the attack, payroll deliberately transferred 6 days before the raid, defensive positions prepared 11 days in advance, and massive land acquisitions at below-market rates in the months following. All of which suggests the raid serves multiple purposes for multiple parties. Whitfield's response is direct. Then focus on one set of purposes. They don't need comprehensive history. They need marketable history. Marketable history. Like the newspapers sold in 1915, like the leather goods sell now. Like everything that makes this land valuable is built on erasing the parts that would make buyers uncomfortable, that would force them to grapple with how prosperity was built, that would require them to acknowledge that their luxury vacation exists on ground where people died over money that wasn't there. Heritage you can wear. Heritage you can stay in. Heritage you can consume without tasting the blood in it. Eliana thinks about Thomas's voice in the commissary, about Alejandro's $14 in receipts, about everyone caught in that night trying to do what they believed was right, and all of them being used by systems larger than themselves, being moved like pieces on a board by players who knew the game while they were just trying to survive. "I can't do that," she says. Silence on the screen. The investors exchange glances, looks that say they didn't expect this, that say consultants don't usually refuse, that say money talks and principles are negotiable and everyone has a price if you offer enough. Whitfield breaks it, asks if she can't or won't. She meets his eyes through the screen. Both. She can't write a defensible appraisal that ignores half the evidence. And she won't construct a narrative that turns real trauma into entertainment for their guests. She won't be part of erasing what happened here just to make it more comfortable for people who can afford $3,000 a night. Whitfield reminds her they hired her as a professional consultant, not a moral arbiter. She responds that they hired her for her professional expertise. Her expertise tells her this property's value is inseparable from its contested history. And more than that, she has documented evidence of ongoing phenomena that will affect guest experience. Temperature drops of 12 degrees in seconds. Auditory phenomena heard by multiple witnesses across decades. Whatever you want to call it, paranormal activity, environmental anomaly, collective psychological response, their guests will experience it. That affects property value, liability, the entire business model. Another investor asks about the phenomena she's documenting, the alleged paranormal activity. Eliana explains she has multiple witnesses, including herself, who've experienced unexplained auditory and visual phenomena. She has recordings and temperature data. Whether those experiences are supernatural, psychological, or environmental, they're part of how people interact with this space. They need to factor that into their development plans, guest services, liability insurance. They can't pretend it doesn't exist just because it complicates the narrative. The investor's response is enthusiastic. Perfect. Heritage tourism loves ghost stories. That's a feature, not a bug. It's not a ghost story, Eliana says. It's unresolved historical trauma. Whitfield's voice carries barely concealed impatience. She is making it impossible to resolve by refusing to choose a narrative framework. Will she provide a deliverable or not? Eliana looks at Patricia on screen. She sees the warning in her eyes. This is the moment where she either compromises or walks away. This is where principles become consequences. This is where she finds out whether she really believes what she says she believes, or whether it is just comfortable rhetoric when nothing is at stake. She tells them she will provide an appraisal, a comprehensive one, documenting everything they have found. They can use it however they choose, but she will not simplify it for commercial purposes. Whitfield's response is flat. That is not acceptable. "Then fire me," Eliana says. The investors exchange glances one more time. Then the inevitable decision arrives exactly as she knew it would. Whitfield says they will discuss this and get back to her, and disconnects. Patricia stays on the line after the investors leave. Her face on screen looks tired, sad, like she is watching a friend make a noble but stupid choice, like she understands the principle but cannot fathom the cost. She tells Eliana she just killed her business. Eliana shrugs. Maybe. Patricia's tone is definitive. Definitely. Nobody hires a consultant who tanks a $100 million deal over moral concerns. You will be marked as unreliable, as someone who lets personal feelings interfere with professional judgment. You are done in heritage consulting. Eliana says she will do something else then. Patricia shakes her head, but there is something almost like admiration in her expression. She asks if Eliana is thinking about Thomas, about how he is forced to choose between impossible options, defend the ranch and be suspected by his own community, or refuse and confirm every suspicion the ranch has about his loyalty. Eliana responds that she is thinking that refusing to choose between bad options is sometimes the only honest thing to do. That saying this is complicated and you need to grapple with the complications is more ethical than reducing everything to asset or liability, profitable or problematic, worth building on or walking away from. Patricia sighs, says that is not how the market works. Eliana meets her eyes through the screen. She knows. But maybe the market is wrong. Maybe some things should not be marketable. Maybe some land should be left alone instead of turned into luxury resorts. Maybe some history should complicate us instead of comfort us. After the call ends, Eliana sits in the quiet hotel room. Outside, Kingsville continues its business. The King Ranch Museum sells tickets. La Frontera House hosts wealthy hunters. The leather goods store sells $400 wallets to tourists who want authentic heritage without uncomfortable truths. Her phone buzzes, a text from Whitfield with the board's decision. They are terminating the contract. She will receive payment for work completed to date, minus penalties for non-delivery per Section 4.2. Legal will be in touch regarding potential damages for breach. She expected this. It still feels like a punch to the stomach. It still feels like watching her career dissolve in real time, like discovering that principals have prices you cannot always afford to pay. What she does not expect is the second text from an unknown number. The King Ranch Foundation wants to talk. Your research. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Someone else has been watching this entire time, someone who wants what she has found, but for different reasons, with different purposes, toward different ends. Maybe her research will be used after all. Maybe the truth will get told, even if it costs her everything. Maybe Thomas Vasquez and Alejandro Canales and all the people caught that night will finally get their story told without simplification, without sanitization, without being reduced to marketing copy for luxury resorts. Or maybe this is just another client wanting something from her work that she won't want to give. Either way, she'll find out tomorrow. Chapter 12. What the Foundation chooses. Let me show you what happens when institutions choose truth over profit. 6 months later, the King Ranch Foundation announces plans for the Norias division. Not a luxury resort, not premium heritage experiences, not casitas with infinity pools overlooking the spot where Tom Hardy died, just preservation, education, and acknowledgement that what happened here is too complicated to be comfortable, too important to be simplified, too contested to have one official version. Complexity. Eliana reads about it online. The Foundation will preserve the site as historical and educational property. The buildings will be stabilized, the grounds maintained, and interpretive materials will acknowledge the complexity of what happened there. No sanitizing, no simplifying, no reducing to simple narratives that serve modern purposes. No sanitizing. The announcement includes a note. Development of interpretation materials will draw on comprehensive historical research recently completed, including financial analysis of the period and documentation of multiple perspectives on the 1915 raid. They've used her appraisal, not the way the consortium wanted, but as a foundation for understanding that doesn't simplify, as a framework for education that doesn't erase. As acknowledgement that some stories deserve to be told whole, even when whole is complicated, even when complicated is uncomfortable, even when uncomfortable doesn't sell. Education. Patricia calls when the announcement goes public. She asks if Eliana has seen the news. Eliana confirms she's just reading it. Patricia points out that the Foundation specifically thanks recent scholarship that illuminates previously overlooked aspects of the raid and its aftermath. That's Eliana. That's her work getting recognized for doing exactly what she refused to compromise on. Recognized, Eliana corrects her. That's us, she says. Patricia's financial analysis is crucial. The paper trail she documented made everything else make sense. She showed how violence became profit. Eliana just showed what that profit cost. Profit. Patricia acknowledges the journey. Eliana took a stand, lost a major client, faced legal threats, and somehow ended up influencing how the property will be used anyway. There's justice in that. Justice. After the call, Eliana drives to Norias one more time. The Foundation's preservation work has begun, contractors stabilizing structures, historians cataloging artifacts, planners developing the interpretive framework that will guide how visitors understand this place. Preservation. She walks through the commissary. Someone has installed protective glass over the bullet holes, not to hide them, but to preserve them. Display cases hold original documents where anyone can read them. A timeline on one wall shows not just the raid, but the context before and after. The intelligence reports, the security spending, the payroll transfer, the land acquisitions. Everything documented, everything acknowledged, everything presented without judgment, but with full complexity. Full complexity. The building feels different. Still old, still bearing scars, but no longer quite so haunted. As if being acknowledged, having its story told as fully as possible, eases something that's been restless for a century. As if truth itself has power to heal even when the truth is complicated. Even when healing doesn't mean resolution. Even when what happened can never be made right, but can at least be made visible. Heal. She stands where the safe was and speaks quietly to empty air. She tells whatever presence might remain that they're telling it right as they can. Not perfect, but honest about the complexity, about the money that wasn't there, about the setup that nobody saw coming, about everyone who got used by systems larger than themselves. Honest. No footsteps respond. No voice in Spanish. Just the normal sounds of an old building being carefully preserved, being treated with dignity, being honored instead of exploited. Maybe the presence finds peace. Or maybe it only manifests when the truth is being ignored, when history is being weaponized, when the same patterns are being repeated because nobody learned from what happened before. Or maybe, and this seems most likely, the phenomena are always about people needing to feel the weight of unresolved history, and once that weight is acknowledged, the need eases. Once the story gets told without sanitizing, the urgency to tell it from beyond diminishes. Once the land remembers out loud instead of in silence, the ghosts can rest. She drives away from Norias as the sun sets, watching the buildings get smaller in her rearview mirror. She thinks about Thomas Vásquez fighting to defend people who don't trust him, about Alejandro Canales riding toward a payroll that isn't there, about everyone caught in that night believing they're doing what has to be done and being wrong in different ways, but human in all of them. 6 months. That's how long it takes for consequence to become opportunity, for loss to become something else, for doors that close to reveal windows opening elsewhere. Chapter 13. The question remains. Let me tell you about what peace looks like. 1 year after Eliana walks away from the consortium's contract, the Norias Heritage Site opens to the public. Free admission, open 5 days a week, staffed by historians who know the complicated truth and don't shy away from telling it. She attends the dedication ceremony. Maria is there too. They've stayed in touch, occasional emails, phone calls when one of them finds new evidence. Maria donated Alejandro's receipts and letters to the site. They're displayed in cases alongside Thomas's testimony and the ranch's financial records. Equal weight, equal respect. After the ceremony, they walk through the completed exhibits. The displays don't choose sides. They show the evidence, the contradictions, the impossible positions everyone occupied. One exhibit features Spanish land grants not recognized by Texas courts. Next to it, documentation of King Ranch land acquisition. 3 feet apart, a century of land theft compressed into 6 feet of museum wall. Another shows Alejandro's $14 in receipts beside the ranch's $120,000 in security preparation. Let's visitors calculate for themselves what that ratio means. A third displays the July 31st ledger entry showing the payroll transfer, alongside testimony from raiders who were told money would be there. The question mark hanging over all of it: who told them? Who gave them intelligence that was either outdated or deliberately false? No answers provided, just questions, honored instead of buried. Maria stops in front of her grandfather's display. She says it's honest, not comfortable, but honest. Eliana nods. That's something. Maria looks at the receipts, the letters. It's more than she expected. Her guests at La Frontera ask sometimes if she's related to anyone involved in the raid. She used to change the subject. Now she tells them yes, and tells them to visit here to understand why it's complicated. When Eliana asks if it hurts business, Maria considers this. Some guests don't come back, but the ones who do understand better want heritage that's real, not sanitized. Turns out there's a market for honesty, too. Smaller, but it exists. They walk outside. The site is open, already drawing visitors. School groups and historians and people who heard about the place from family stories. The foundation hasn't advertised the paranormal aspect, but one display acknowledges that multiple visitors have reported auditory and visual phenomena in the commissary building. Whether these experiences are supernatural, psychological, or environmental remains subject to interpretation. The evidence is presented: temperature records, audio recordings, witness testimonies. The conclusion is left open. As she's leaving, a teenager approaches, high school age, nervous, carrying a school project folder. He asks if she's Eliana Vásquez, the heritage consultant. She confirms. He explains he's writing a paper about the Norias Raid, that his teacher says she did important research. He asks if he can ask her something. She tells him sure. He looks down at his notes, asks the question that matters to him. Is it revolution or banditry? What really happened? And there it is, the question everyone asks. Eliana smiles, tells him that's the question everyone asks. And the answer is that it depends on how you define those terms, whose perspective you privilege, what evidence you emphasize. The raiders believe they're revolutionaries fighting for justice. The ranch believes they're defending their property against bandits. Both are partly right and partly wrong. The teenager looks frustrated. His paper needs a thesis. Eliana considers how to help, then argue that the binary is false, she says, that reducing complex human action to simple categories distorts what actually happened, that the question itself, revolution or banditry, is shaped by who has power to define terms, who writes official history. He grimaces, says his teacher won't like that. Probably not, Eliana agrees, but it's the most accurate answer she can give him. Sometimes the true answer is, it's complicated, and we need to sit with that complicated complication. The teenager thanks her and leaves, still looking uncertain. Eliana watches him go, hoping he'll wrestle with the ambiguity rather than simplify it for an easy grade. That's what she's learned from all of this, that living with complicated truths is harder but more honest than constructing simple lies. Her business changed after she walked away from the consortium. Fewer commercial clients willing to pay premium rates for sanitized history. More academic institutions wanting comprehensive research. More historical societies willing to pay less, but wanting truth more. Patricia was right. She killed her old business model, but something different grew in its place. Something that pays less and matters more. She wrote 3 more appraisals in the past year. Each asked similar questions about how to value land that holds violence, how to tell stories that honor the people who lived them. The work pays less, matters more. That seems like a reasonable trade. Her phone buzzes. Text from Maria. Alejandro would have appreciated what you did. Choosing truth over money. That's rare. Hold on to that. Eliana drives away from Norias, watching the buildings get smaller. She watches the South Texas landscape flatten in golden light. She thinks about all the stories this land holds. She thinks about Thomas Vásquez, pacing in an empty building for a century, trying to explain something that won't be understood until someone is willing to hear the whole complicated truth. And maybe now he can rest. Maybe now that the story is being told without simplification, the urgency to tell it from beyond eases. The sun is setting. The South Texas sky turns orange and pink, beautiful and indifferent. The question that starts all of this remains, is the Norias Raid revolution or banditry? And the answer Eliana finds is that the question is wrong. It assumes binary categories that human experience doesn't fit. The raid is a political statement by people with genuine grievances about dispossession and injustice. It is also a poorly planned operation by desperately poor fighters who got used by people with better intelligence and different purposes. It is manipulated by people with advanced knowledge who profit from violence, regardless of who wins. It is defended by men trying to protect others while being used by systems that don't trust them. All those things are true simultaneously. The land still holds it all, the complexity, the contradiction, the impossible choices, documented in archives, whispered in family stories, preserved now in museums that honor complexity instead of erasing it. Eliana drives toward Kingsville one final time. The future is uncertain, but honest. History is heavy, but real. The work is hard, but meaningful. The question remains. It will always remain. And maybe that's the only honest answer history can give, not resolution, but acknowledgement, not simplicity, but complexity honored, not comfortable conclusions, but questions that make us wrestle with what we believe and why we believe it. Maybe that's enough.